Hi there, I'm Tom Poland, and this is the MadCat Scope X. Essentially what it is, it's a very high quality motor which is mounted to the frame in which you fit a hand grinder with a specific lock collar for that particular hand grinder. And currently you can get these lock collars for the Comandante C40 and C60, as well as the Easypresso ZP6 and the Kinu M47, and there are more being made virtually as we speak. So that's what it is, and that's what it does. A too long different read summary is that it works really well, and if you like kit and gadget or you're sick of hand grinding, you should probably look at getting one. So let's go on to the detail though. Item 1 on the agenda, I'm going to, a couple of little points I need to talk about before we get into the features, which is item 2. We'll go through the features. We'll have a look at how it works, how does it lock into the motor. We'll have a look at it in action. So we'll actually grind some beans, obviously. I'll let you know what I like about it, what I think are some of the quirks, who should buy one of these and probably who shouldn't. And then a bit of a treat for you. I've got a section I'm calling Meet the Maker, or Meet Your Maker, I should say. And that's where we'll get to have a chat with Schalvik, who is the developer, the Australian developer of this rather marvelous unit and well thought out unit. So background and kind of heads up. I ordered 2 of these units on the back of a review that the prodigious and ubiquitous Lance Hedrick did of the Scope, the version before this, which was about 2 years ago. So now these are coming into production in about 3 months from now, 3 or 4 months from now. You can find out more details on the MadCat website, MadKat website. If you Google search MadCat and Scope X, then you'll find out all the details there. So I ordered a couple of these units, and Schalvik, who's the creator of this wonderful device, sent me this prototype to review. So I don't get to keep it. I'm not being paid to do the review. I did pre-order a couple of these units prior to this review being even suggested. So that's the full disclosure. A couple of little things there. You'll see some stickers on the grinder. Just ignore those. I put them on for my own purposes. There's also a sticker here which does not come with the unit. So other than that, I think that's all that I need to disclose. Oh, one other thing. I'm not an engineer, so I can't comment on durability. I can't really comment on motor power or anything like that. All I can do is put beans through and see if it works. So just bear that in mind. It's not an engineering review. It's kind of a first looks review. I've had this now and used it on my bench for about 10 or 11 days. And overall, I'm pretty impressed, although I said there's a couple of quirks. So main features, it's around 2.6 kilos, which is pretty robust for a unit of this size. It's got a serious amount of heft to it. That's without the grinder being loaded. So it's not inclined to move around much on the bench. It's got a good sized footprint, not too much, not too small so that it'll be unstable, and not too much that it's going to take up a lot more space than it reasonably should take up. It has what I would regard as a premium brush motor. It's rated to 800 hours of use. Runs at 75 watts with a maximum wattage of 144 watts, 24 volts, 6 amps, none of which means much to me, but I've asked Schalvik to provide those stats for the interest of those people who do know a bit more about power supplies and motors than I do. But I have figured this much out. At 800 hours, and let's say you grind 20 grams per grind, 2 per day, average of say 40 seconds per grind, which is on the generous side, this thing's going to last you 1,500 kilos of beans, or about 5 burr sets, depending on the burr set type, or about 102 years. So it's going to go much longer than I'm going to go, that's for sure. The main unit without the variable RPM motor runs at 180 RPM, a nice low RPM, and at that RPM, it seems to handle light roast, every roast level that you could set it, particularly if you hot start. So that's the RPM. Under load, that'll go down to about 140 RPM. There is, as I said, a variable RPM unit, which is really cool. I'm just going to reach over and grab it. This little unit here, if you turn this around to the side, you'll see that the frame is a certain shape. And this little variable RPM unit is really easy to fit. You just pull the power supply out from the main unit, plug that into the back of the variable RPM unit, power's on, take the lead from the variable RPM unit and pop that where the original power cable came out of. And I'm just struggling to see this because of the light, but it actually does go in very easily once you find the right spot. And then this whole unit just neatly slides in to the frame. Very nicely done. And then there's a bunch of little screws with Allen key heads that you fit to secure it, which I'm going to do now. So that's the variable speed RPM unit fitted. As you can see, it fits in really nicely in the frame. So it really looks like it's integrated and it came with it, not so much an optional extra, which it is. On the other side, you'll find the speed dial for the RPM. There's an oil switch here for the RPM. It doesn't have a case over at the moment, but remember, this is a prototype unit, so that'll all be nicely sorted. Now, I just leave that on the whole time and on-off button at the top of the motor. The dial at 12 o'clock is going to produce 80 RPM. If we put it around to the left-hand side at what you call 7 o'clock, then it's 40 RPM. And if we have it all the way around the other side at 5 o'clock, then it's the full 180 RPM that it would normally be if you didn't have the variable speed RPM. Other features, it has quite a nice little grounds catching plate, which is magnetic, that just slips nicely off and on there. The other item that comes with each unit is a rubber band, and these rubber bands are very specific to the hand grinder that you're mounting into the Scope X. So the one that I'm using is actually designed for a C40, and this is a Comandati C60, which is a bigger burr set by 50%, and it needs a different rubber band. So full disclosure, I've had some slipping when grinding where the hand grinder will just spin around, but that will be addressed in the production unit with the C60s. I think I mentioned that there's quite a few upgrades between the Gen 3 scope and this Gen 4, the Scope X, and I just wanted to run you by them very quickly. So one of the things that's changed is this lock collar is specific to each grinder, as I mentioned before, C40/C60, EasyPresso ZP6. So you can just easily slip one grinder off and put another grinder on. If you desire to do that, you just got to line up the ridge here with the slot, and it's as easy as that. Off and back on again. How easy. So, the other feature that I wanted to touch on is there's quite a clever little steel band here with a series of numbers on it, probably a bit far away for you to see from the camera, but that's just so that you can shift it around to the number of clicks on your grinder or the position on your grinder, so that you can remember exactly where you were grinding at. So I think that's quite a clever little innovation. The other thing that does make a difference is there's a little knocker that Shelvix put on the side here. It has kind of a little clutch on it, so you have to just, don't know if you can see that, but once you've done the knocking, then you just touch it and it slots back into place. That locking mechanism is not vital if you forget to do it. It's there so that if you move the grinder doesn't shift in transit. So I quite like the knocking feature. I have tested it. It does make definitely a difference. It probably gets another, I don't know, 0.3 or 0.4 of a grand out of the hand grinder. Another improvement is the stand is now all metal, so much heavier, just looks more premium. Better wire management with the integration of the cables, as I showed before, slotting into the motor up here, or the RPM unit slotting into the rear of the RPM unit. So really nicely integrated, and this cable that's sticking out here actually tucks in quite nicely. In the variable speed module, I know I mentioned it before, but that is another improvement. It now slips into the frame rather than being a completely separate unit. So time to see the Scope X in action. I have some beans here from Mountaintop Estate, which have been roasted to medium light. I measured them on the Tonino color analyzer scale, 91, so almost exactly in the middle of medium and light. I'm going to cold start the Scope X on 180 RPM, and then we'll wind it back and see how it copes. Run it back to 80 RPM, coping absolutely fine. 40 RPM starting to struggle, so I'm going to keep it at 80 RPM. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to wind it back up to 180. and it has performed with aplomb. Use the knocker on the side. Job done. Take off the catch cup. Voila. So there we go, magically emptied. And once it's emptied, you're just going to screw the catch cup back onto the grinder. So that's it. So prior to that slippage starting to happen, because I don't have the C60 band, I was actually grinding some of Tim Wendelboe's Nordic Light roast beans. I was using 180 RPM and it was handling it just fine. So I'm really confident that once the C60 band is sorted out, that it'll handle Nordic Light or whatever else you want to throw at it, provided you get the right RPM. So what do I like about it? Well, I like the fact that I don't have to hand grind, but I still get to enjoy the coffee from my C60, which I do greatly enjoy. I really like the fact that the 35 or so seconds that it's grinding and I'm not having to hand grind, I can use to prepare the portafilter, wipe it out, put the paper in, etc. I like the style of it. I think it looks pretty cool. I think it's compact enough. I like the fact that it's black. I really like the variable RPM unit because I just like the idea of variable RPM and being able to play around and experiment with that. So there's an awful lot that I do like about it. The quirks, well, I think I've mentioned those. You really need to dial in the RPM, need to hold the unit when you're putting the catch cup back on the bottom, otherwise you can unlock the whole unit. So one of the things I would like to change on the unit is that this knocker, as I'm looking at the unit, I have to push it back. That's not such a natural action for me as if it was going the other direction and I'm flicking it towards me. That's much easier. So I'd like to see that reverse, put on the other side and go forward. Again, it's not a biggie, but it's just a little preference that I would personally have. So who should buy this? This is for you if you love the coffee you get from your hand grinder and you don't love hand grinding, then this is an obvious solution. It's also for you if you have wrist issues and you don't want to go to an electric grinder, again, because you love the coffee from your hand grinder. And it's also for anyone that just likes a well thought out, well designed, well engineered, quality piece of kit that does the job seamlessly and flawlessly. I get a lot of pleasure from that. So using this every morning for the last 10 days or so has been a real treat. I do think you have to bear in mind that this is likely to add 50% on over and above the cost of your hand grinder. If you opt for the variable RPM kit, that is it worth it? Well, for me it is, but ultimately it's going to be your call. My job's done, which was to review the grinder. So the next part of this review is going to be the conversation I have with Shalvik, who has been kind enough to volunteer to rock up and answer some of the questions I have collated from Coffee Forum members about the Scope X. So stay tuned, it's coming your way in just a few seconds. All right, so welcome everyone to Meet Your Maker. I'm Tom Poland from Tom's Grinder Lab. This is Shalvik. Shalvik, g'day, very well welcome, sir. Where are you calling in from?
Melbourne, not too far away from you.
And not too far indeed. Little birdie tells me you're flying out to a wedding soon. Is that right?
That's right. We've got a family wedding. It's
so
going
folks,
to be
if you haven't already guessed, Shalvik is the maker, the creator of the Mad Cat with a K, Scope also with a K, X. And this is essentially the fourth generation motor mounted on a frame that will save you having to hand grind your favorite hand grinder. So before this video, of course, was my review you would have seen, but I invited Shalvik on because I always think it's kind of one-dimensional when a reviewer does a review and there's no input at all, no sort of write or reply from the maker or the creator. Because as reviewers, we're prone to have bias, or we don't overlook things, we leave things out or whatever. So thanks so much for being here. I know you're under the pump time-wise flying out to a wedding, but I think this is going to be really interesting for folks. let's kick off with a little bit of backgrounder, because I did a little bit of research on your website, not exactly research, but this was the original idea, and that was just for the C40, I believe, and that morphed into this, I think, also for the C40, which is now, of course, morphed into this, which I think is a elegant, stylish piece of functional art, sort of the thing you might find in a museum almost. And so tell us about the journey, because there's a lot that's changed even since Lance Hedrick reviewed this 2 years ago. What got you started?
It's
What's the evolution been like? Just take 3 or 4 minutes and tell us a bit of background.
Yeah, sure thing. I started out with a smart, what is it, the Breville Smart Grinder Pro. And then I kind of switched over to the C40, and the jump in quality from that was just staggering. Like it was going from like black and white to Technicolor. So I was just like, wow, this is an awesome grinder. And at that point, I was like, okay, let's make espressos with this every day, because my daily routine is basically an espresso and then a filter after that. So I was like, all right, this is it. But I think hand grinding for espresso can get a little bit tiring. So I was like, I'm an engineer. I can make stuff. I've been doing this for about 15 years at that point. So I thought, this should be a fun little project. And
just one weekend project. Right?
Here we are, 4 years later.
Something to do over Easter.
But yeah, it's been fun.
So how many years ago was it you started to tinker with this idea?
About 4 years. 4 years ago is when I made the first feasibility concept, and that was just a very hokey kind of setup at home, just to see if it even works. And and after proving that out, that's when I built that very tall version, the first gen, I was really happy with that one.
What did you
call it? That I wanted it to be like super nice. And I'm sorry,
what did you call it?
Oh, I think I just called it the motorizer. I didn't have a name for it at that point.
The motorizer.
But yeah, pretty simple. It's just a motorizer.
And
but yeah,
I think you moved on from that one because you kind of overspec'd it. Is that right? It was just amazing, but out of people, not
absolutely.
Maybe it wasn't going to be as accessible for people.
Well, yeah, I was just kind of like, this is going to be the coolest motorizer ever, right? Like, so I went all in, and I just went the whole 9 yards with it. And then by the end of it, I was like, oh no, this is like really expensive. And like for me, when I started with the project, it was very much about the fact that I have a hand grinder that I absolutely love,
right? And
I just want an easy way to motorize it and just kind of use it for my daily espresso and filter. But whatever solutions kind of were out there, either didn't look as nice as I wanted them to be, didn't feel like they had a good user experience. So I was like, I think I can make something better. So had to go at it.
And so what was the difference between Gen 1 and
there you go, that was the first one.
And this one?
Yeah, so the OG scope was probably a good step in, I think, the right direction, because at the end of the day, I wanted people to have an accessible option to motorize their hand grinders, and I think that this kind of went closer to that direction. The bayonet lock came into that picture at that point, and I thought that was a handy little thing, because I was able to get the grinder out, because I clean my grinder pretty often, so I think it was pretty handy to be able to do that. The interesting thing that happened after the first scope was something Lance pushed as well, which is the RPM functionality, and that kind of opened up a whole nother area of possibilities. If you haven't tried slow RPM grinding for filters, and even for espresso for that matter, I think it's you'll be surprised at the results. I think it's really quite impressive what's possible when you do slow grinding. I have a friend local here Yanni, who was comparing the C40 at slow RPM with like a lab suite, and I was absolutely blown away by the comparative, how comparable the brews were in strength and presentation, and yet how different they were in terms of flavor profiles.
Sorry to cut you short.
Yeah,
on
that
was. And I love the idea of this variable RPM. And just a reminder, folks, this is an optional extra for the unit, but it'll go down to 40 RPM, assuming the bean is, you can grind that with if it's Nordic Light, you wouldn't be grinding it at 40 RPM for espresso. Yeah. And I mentioned in the review, as a reflection of your original comments, is that you're dialing in the RPM. So you sacrifice exactly 20 grams of beans, put them in, put it on at 180, which is max, get it grinding, and then just dial it down and see where the motor doesn't cope, and just put it back up a little bit. And that way you get the lowest possible RPM for that particular bean. And I think that's a really good way to manage, because otherwise you've got this mega monster motor that, like a Dewar, it's going to grind green beans, but it's going to be big and it's going to be expensive. So to me, this is a well thought out design because you can manage the RPM. So I like that. And I just like the idea of being able to play with the RPM, having the option. Some people say it doesn't make any difference to what's in the cup. Other people say it makes a big difference to what's in the cup. And I like the option to kind of play with that. So this was another big change. But and I'm just conscious of time, so I'm sorry, I'm kind of taking over a little bit here.
No, it's all good.
So we had version 1, which was the motorizer, which was the motorizer to end all motorizers, but probably a bit overspec'd and a bit expensive. And then version 2, which was this one here, was kind of a big step in the right direction. Version 3, which Lance, so folks, if you go to Lance Hedrick's wonderful YouTube channel, you'll see version 3 reviewed. It's about 2 years old. And I covered this in review, but real quick, what's changed between the version 1 and version 2? Hopper's at the front now, much easier to access. Unit is integrated into the frame, which is really neat. And I know I asked you the question, but I'm answering for the sake of time. These lock collars are now no longer universal, are specific to each grinder. So there's quite a big advantage in that you can just kind of unlock one, take it off, and put another one back on, already fitted. But tell us more about the interaction between the rubber band, because you have different rubber bands, and the lock collar. What's the function of the lock collar, and what's the relationship with the rubber bands? Because this came with 2 rubber bands, and we had to figure out which one was the right one for the C60.
Yeah. So first up, I think you're the first person to test with the C60 on the Scope X, so that's pretty exciting to see right there. But yeah, fundamentally, I think the landscape is so diverse. You've got and even within the C40 landscape, you've got powder coat versions, you've got wooden exterior versions, and then you've got the C60, which I think is closer to the powder coat dimensions, but the burrs are much larger, so the torque holding requirement is a lot higher.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, and that's why for a single collar to work across all 3 outer diameter specs, you'll need different silicon band thicknesses to make sure that you dial into the right torque to hold it properly for all espresso and light filter settings.
Right.
But yeah, it's staggering how many hand grinders there are out in the market, and
right.
Just
easy.
And on one hand,
is a bewildering array. Okay,
that's right.
So
it's just once you press it, they've got so many.
Right, and can you, because a lot of grinders, you do the adjust, you take the catch cup off and you adjust that underneath. But something like the EasyPresso ZP6 and all of the others, the adjustments have a collar at the top. So how do you handle that? How do you have a lock collar on there and still have not kind of throttle the adjustment? You've got something special you developed for the ZP6.
Yeah, no, that was a fun and interesting challenge to solve. I was very curious to try out the ZP6, particularly after Lance's reviews of it. What I was especially keen to do was kind of, do espressos with my C40 and then use the ZP6 for filters. So that led to me kind of getting one and seeing how I could make it work on the Scope X. And obviously the external lock color feature on here meant that you need a mechanism to kind of slide the color up and down, and still lock it back on.
Nice.
So it's a pretty simple
if you would hold the whole
three-piece
thing up to the camera.
arrangement.
Can you hold the whole
sure,
unit up to the camera? Right. So you can see the ZP6 there, and that just, so you slide it down, do the adjustment, slide it back up again. Bloody clever.
That's it. I should be uploading a few more videos in terms of what the installation process looks like, and I've tested it with local users over here as well. So it's looking pretty good so far, and I think it's pretty close to the final version for this. But yeah, the ability to sort of take it off the grinder, adjust as you need to, and then run back up and then lock it back in, or even switch out the drive between the C40 and the ZP6 was important.
One other question. I've got a few questions here from forum members, but one other question I wanted to ask you before we start them. Why not just use a power drill with an adapter? What's the advantage of having this unit over just going?
I love this, especially because I actually started out with a drill, and I think for my morning routine, I was definitely looking for something that, I feel like this is something that's common to a lot of people, making coffee in the morning. Like that is definitely my Zen routine. Like I start the day with a coffee. It's what I look forward to. It's what gets me out of bed. Once I
you really want
make
to go
my coffee,
just grind, just do it, don't faff around.
That's right. Like I don't want to just sit there holding a grinder on top of it, because it's not just kind of like holding the grinder, it's also holding the hand grinder while you're doing it. And the fact is, like, if you're okay with doing that, I think that's a perfectly fine solution. The only thing I would recommend is kind of making sure you don't run it at too high a speed, because that's when you might damage the grinder from a point of view of wear and tear. I don't think the burrs are meant to run at higher than a fairly lowish RPM. Like 200 is probably the most that I'd want to run it at.
And I think
maybe a touch higher, actually.
I know I've been guilty of underestimating the change in just one variable. And I've also underestimated how precise grinders are manufactured to within microns of tolerances. So, 0.002 of a millimeter. And as soon as you introduce a different variable, such as instead of hand grinding, putting a power drill in there, that can change a whole lot of durability, if you like, issues with it within the hand grinder. But there's nothing wrong with it if you've got a high torque and a low speed drill bit, you can do that. But really,
that's right. And
I mean, and it's a very elegant solution. I think.
I think the biggest moment that probably triggered this whole motorizer project was probably my wife walking into the kitchen, and at this point, I'm storing my power drill on the ground. I'm sitting in the other room, and I hear like loud, painful yell from the kitchen. And she's like, "Why is there a power tool on the ground?" And because she's managed to knock it onto her foot. And I'm like, okay, I should probably do something about this.
Yeah, not a good look. So let's get on to some of the questions from the forum members. So WMWBJ from Coffee Time, what is the resistance of the Comandante crank handle when grinding for espresso, and how does it compare to the force needed to lock in your portafilter? I'm not even sure what that means, but I think you do.
No, I love it because on one hand, you're looking for numbers, for data to kind of give you a starting point and understanding what is the relative difference in force. And on the other hand, you're actually looking for a subjective experience kind of descriptor to be like, okay, what does that mean? Like, how much more difficult is it compared to like locking in a filter? And I just love it. Like, I mean, the first thing I did after like reading this was take out my my luggage weighing scale. I wrapped it around the portafilter to get some force measurements or kg measurements. And it turns out that the force is comparable. But what's different is that with a portafilter, you have a momentary force applied, and it's a one-time thing. Whereas with the hand grinder, you're actually wrapping it around. Your force fluctuates with the beans. Sometimes you get more coffee that you're grinding at one point, sometimes less. So basically what's happening is that while the force is comparable, the experience is, it's a lot more work to hand grind versus locking in a filter, is probably the way to describe it.
Okay.
And I was testing with Tim Wendelboe, or like a say light roast, which is what I had been on for probably the last 4 years, and it's all espresso with light filters is a workout. Yeah. You better be ready for it.
This question is around the resistance of the Comandante crank handle. I don't even understand the question, but so I'm going to have to ask you: have you answered it?
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay.
Like, to give you a sense, it was about 4 kgs around
Real quick.
at the portafilter length, which is like 12 months. And if you apply that same kind of force throughout the crank handle, it's the same kind of thing. But you'll find that if you try and hand crank and hand grind a light roast at at very fine espresso settings, it's a lot more energy. It's a lot more work,
and even more so with the 360. Yeah, because of the bigger burst set. It's hard work when you first start. I do think as the burst season, it gets easier. Okay, so this follow-up question from WMWJB is probably what I should have asked you along with the first one. Other than time spent hand grinding, an advantage to me would be the Scope X motor taking the strain, especially if someone has a wrist issue. If locating the portafilter takes as much or more force, the motor may not be as attractive. Have you answered that?
No, I think so, but to maybe extend on that, I had a hand injury a couple years back and last year as well, and it took me a while to kind of get over that, but having the motorizer on hand for that was very nice.
Right. Okay. So how quick is it to detach the Scope X mounting collar, I think you're referring to the lock collar, from the grinder body, if popping out to make coffee with the grinder somewhere else other than at home?
What do you think? Maybe
I can show you right now.
Yeah.
I mean, what I would do is just buy another hand grinder for taking out from home and leave this in place. But it's really doesn't take very long. I mean, I'm not much of a mechanic, but you can see how little time that took. Do it a few times, I'm sure you get quicker. That's probably the best answer, I think. Beragora from Coffee Snobs, a bit surprised that you have to have a lock collar, but it's not included in the main price.
Oh man, I
probably explain that by explaining that you need a different lock collar.
Yeah, no, I
specific hand grinder.
Yeah, exactly. No, I appreciate the question a lot, because I think when you are looking for a motorizer for a hand grinder in mind, the C40 particularly, you're kind of like, okay, what's the price? What I need to pay for another something? And I kind of was deliberating over this a little bit when I kind of set up the pre-order store, because on one hand, I want to make it very easy and simple for people to understand what is the cost for a motorizer setup for a C40. But at the same time, over the past 4 years, as the way that I brew coffee has changed, I kind of want the same thing for the same experience for other users, where they don't feel like they're locked into any particular setup. So I think, when I think back to my original problem, which is that I have a hand grinder, I wanted to motorize it, and I wanted it to be accessible. I figured the best way that I could do this is make the solution modular, so that you are only buying what you need. If you don't have a C40 and you have another grinder, say you have a very Kinu or a ZP6 or something else, and my hope is that people actually tinker with this and create their own colors. But yeah, I think that if you have your own hand grinder that you want to motorize, then you're not buying something you don't need.
Yeah, yeah. So you're not getting stuff you're never going to need, but you're still paying for it. I haven't put this back on because I just need to get that adjustment level right, and I don't want to do that while we're doing the video. But let me just say that you could have a lock collar on your C40 or your C60 or whatever, and you could have your Easy, Easy Presso or Kino with its lock collar, and you can just simply put that one on, change the swap to do a filter or whatever you like. So it gives you an enormous amount of flexibility. But yeah, it does mean that you're going to have to put the specific lock collar in your basket when you buy it. And remember to put the variable RPM unit in there, because that's pretty darn sexy. Last question. What are
yep, go for it.
Sorry, you had another comment you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think in sort of a passing note, I think the biggest thing that I really wanted for customers, I think, to experience was the ability to explore different burr profiles without taking tools out.
Yeah,
I think not feeling locked in with particular anything is something that I feel like is essential and sort of a big part of the coffee experience. You want to experiment, you want to try things out, and you want the motorizer to kind of go along for that journey with you.
Okay, thank you for that. Last question from Beragora. Does it matter how you pronounce an avatar? I think you get more license than a personal name. So Beragora it is. Could be Baruja. What's it made of? What's the materials you've got in here? Walk us through it. The frame, lock collar, funnel.
Yeah, so starting with the stand, you've got a stainless steel powder coat frame, and we've got some magnets in there and a rubber base or non-slip base. You've got a plastic components for the lock section and the funnel, and then you've got a motor and chassis that's all metal, and a lock ring at the top to keep that tube in place. And most of the materials are going to be molded out of PETG. What else is there? There's a spring in there, but yeah, stainless steel.
Will the production unit have this little steel band with the numbers on it to record? Sorry, will the production unit have this little steel band on it to record the? Yeah, that's quite a clever idea. And the knocker, how easy is it to turn that around so it comes? Yeah, because I just find it a bit awkward when it's in front of me and I'm. It's not a big deal. It's just that I normally have grinders either side, so the space.
It's interesting. And I can kind of understand that, because the closest thing that I have for a knocker comparison is the EK43, the legendary, right? Like you have a flick kind of thing that's sort of down as opposed to push. I guess, I'd probably say if you hold on to the frame, maybe this is the best way to do it. Yeah. If you hold on to the frame this way, that tends to be how I'd kind of envision it, as opposed to just a sort of a floating flick. It's a
peculiarity I have, because I normally have a grinder here and another grinder here, so there's not a lot of room to reach around the side. Yeah. So if I come around, I'm facing it here. It's just a bit easier for me to flick it forward than it is to flick it back.
Right.
Pretty small thing. I'm going to let you go. Thanks so much for your time. Enjoy the wedding. And we'll look forward to catching. When do you think production units are going to start going out, and where can people order one? Very importantly.
Pre-sale orders are open through our website, and we're pushing for a Feb delivery. We are running close into CNY holidays, so hopefully we don't see an impact from that. We are pushing for Feb still. Okay. But yeah, I think.
And what's the website? What's the URL?
Madcatcoffee.com. There's a link from there with our pre-order store, and backerkit.com.
Mad Cat Coffee, cat with a K. And well, I wish you every success with this. I think it's a fabulous endeavor. Looking forward to getting my 2 units just as soon as you can get back from your wedding.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Shalvik.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.